Welcome, everyone, to episode 3 of the Timelines podcast. On today's episode, my guest and I talk about the very best of Cincinnati, Ohio, the vintage trend of the modern watch market, and what it's like to start your very own watch company. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Timelines podcast presented by the Watch Preserve. I'm your host, Michael Pandolfo, and today I've got a very, very cool guest. He's an avid watch enthusiast, a lover of Skyline chili, and as well as the founder and owner of the Microbrand Cincinnati Watch Company. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Rick Bell.
Hello. Great introduction. The Skyline thing's innate to people born in Cincinnati, so I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily like a big time Skyline person, but I do eat it.
It just kind of comes with the job description, right?
Yeah, well, you're fed it at birth, so
Right, yeah, you have to
just
develop.
everybody just eats it.
I think that's the only way that you can really stomach that stuff is to develop the taste from an early age.
It really is because you have outer staters that look at that stuff and they're like, no.
That was kind of my reaction. I guess this is kind of nice because it serves as a little bit of a background for our listeners. Rick, you and I have known each other for a few years. When I
Mhm.
moved to Cincinnati in, God, when was that? 2021, I think. No, 2019, fall 2019.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
yeah,
longer than
wow,
that.
yeah, it's been a while. I started my
Mhm.
master's program out there at the Music Conservatory in 2019, and I was introduced to the Cincinnati Red Bar, of which you are a
Mhm.
member, right?
And you're still an honorary lifetime member of Red Bar Cincy, so
I wear
yeah.
that badge with honor, man. I really do. But that's a great group of collectors out there in Cincinnati. It's a lot of really
Yeah,
nice,
really laid back.
yeah, a
Really
lot of
laid back
down
and
to
stuff.
earth people with some great watches, and a lot of people that are really tapped into the community. I mean, Steve Moore
Mhm.
is the huge vintage guy. You have you who is on the product and the design brand of things. Zach, Cincy Strap
Yeah,
Company. Um,
yeah,
there's a lot of horological value coming out of Cincinnati.
yeah, and historically too. So it's kind of cool. Um,
Right. Eh,
and I really like those guys. It's a fun group, and like you said, it's pretty laid back, and
for
you have,
sure.
you have guys that are interested in all different things. So you get to see a wide variety in that group for sure.
Absolutely. And I will get into, like you kind of teased, the horological history of
Hmm.
Cincinnati here in a little bit. But before we really get into it, we are recording this on, oh geez, what's today? Friday the 27th,
Yep.
which means that this week Cincinnati Watch Company came out with an exciting new watch. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that came out actually yesterday, and at the moment of this recording, I think we have 13 of them left, so they're about gone. By the time maybe you publish this, we won't have them anymore. But we did create a watch that has a bit of humor tied to it, and I think it's appropriate that kind of we're having this conversation since the watch preserves, sells in vintage watches. Um, a few years back, uh, my watchmaker, and of all places, he found it on eBay. Someone selling 10,000 new old stock vintage cases.
10,000.
10,000.
Wow.
And he came to me and he's like, "Oh, well, we should just buy it, you know." And I was kind of like, "Well, let's hold up. Let's see. Let's get a gross or examples of what they've got, and let's determine, can we use them? Can we put a modern movement in them? Like, are they viable?" And as you would imagine, many of them were like 32 millimeter men's watches that just isn't going to meet the market demand. But there were a few that we really liked. The first one was a case from the 1950s. And that one was like factory wrapped. I mean, it still had the wrapping from when it was made in Switzerland in 1950. So,
Nice.
like all the polishing, everything on it, they look like new watches. And we turned those into our Ladies Union Terminal watch, which are available on the website now. But we also, along with that, got these, which is a 70s I want to call it a diver,
Yeah.
but it isn't a diver. Even when this was brand new in 1970, I mean, it has a snapback case. It's just marked water resistant, so this really wasn't a diver, but it was just so cool that we decided to and we could fit a modern movement in it. So we've got an SW210, a Salida hand wound movement in this watch. um, we fitted it with a new crystal that actually matched what the original crystal looked like.
Hmm.
And then on the dial is marked 0 feet equals 0 meters, no submersion, superlative depth diver, unofficially certified. Because we knew we couldn't make it water resistant.
Yeah.
We thought we'd have real fun with this one and, just kind of tell what it is right on the dial. And we call it the Death Diver. And people have really loved it. Like I said, we're nearly sold out, and we just launched them yesterday.
That's so fun.
So yeah, vintage Swiss made case. The I couldn't find out much about the brand. It's Aetos, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that
Hmm.
right. It's Aetos was who manufactured this case.
Sure.
Um, Probably one of many Swiss brands that fell during the quartz crisis. Who knows, some smaller brand, but leave it up to the watch community, right? So we post about this thing, and I spent uh, Thursday night chatting with a watchmaker from Canada that reached out to me, who had all this information on the brand that I had no idea about. And apparently, at one point, this brand was owned or passed around uh, with the likes of like Hamilton and Longines and Tissot. like
Really?
like they had a relationship somehow, maybe as just a case supplier. I mean, even the case itself, it isn't marked with the brand name on the back.
Hmm.
It's on the inside of the case back, which indicates to me this case probably, who knows what it would have said on the dial, right? Who knows what this was actually ever made for. And we had no idea what the dials in hand would have looked like, right? We never saw an original example. We just had the cases. So it was really fun kind of trying to match the 70s funk with this thing, with the dial, and then adding the kind of humorous text to it,
Hmm.
because it truly is not water resistant. I mean, this you would have to treat like a vintage watch, even though it's got modern guts in it.
I think that you guys really, I mean, just, I had seen the watch a little bit when you came out with the teaser pictures and everything like that. And I think you guys really nailed it. I mean,
It's
the,
fun.
it's very fun. And that really 70s kind of like tonneau cushion shape, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But that,
Hmm.
that really, really, I mean, you really just kind of hit the hallmarks of that 70s design with the bright
Yeah,
colors and the kind of angular text and features.
and it's fun because it has all these vintage cues, right? Like it's a tension fit bidirectional bezel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the crown guards you would call eagle beak in the
Yep.
Rolex parlance. It's just it's got all this cool vintage 70s look about it, and it's thin as can be. I mean, you've got a thick acrylic crystal on this thing, and it's only 10.9 millimeters thick. You take away that acrylic crystal, this case is
Yeah.
probably like 8 millimeters. So it's really a nice wearing cool watch that, just so long as you don't jump in a pool with it or splash it, you're going to be fine. Um,
It's funny to me how much in the watch community we stress, having a screw down crown and having 300-meter water resistance and all these things. But I was just talking to another friend last night, and I feel like the majority of maybe not diver quote unquote, but things that say water resistant or things that kind of
mhm,
market themselves as sport watches. From the vintage side that I've seen here, very few of them have screw down crowns. Most of them, you'll have at
mhm,
least a screw on case back, but it's usually just a standard crown, friction fit, bidirectional bezel. And I
mhm.
don't, I don't know if that was so much because brands like Rolex or Omega sort of had the copyright
Yeah.
for a lot of that actual physical material to produce screw down crowns like that or not. But I just think it's interesting the evolution of how now people say, "Well, my
Well,
my watch isn't 300 meters. I can't take it swimming." And it's like 300 meters is really really deep, man.
yeah. Well, and it's, and we're in landlocked Cincinnati here. It's like, I don't know how many people here are getting wet that often. I know I don't in my daily life.
Certainly not in the Ohio. You don't want to go in
Yeah,
that thing. No.
yeah. You don't want to go into the Ohio River, period. Probably come out with a third arm, um, but the I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, it's like there isn't really much of a concern, I think, to water resistance as we in the community like worry about.
Yeah,
I've had
absolutely.
vintage watches for years that I know either don't have water resistance at all or I wouldn't trust them. And it's just like, well, wear a modern watch on a day that you think that there's some risk that you're going to get splashed with water. I mean,
Right.
don't wear it on, when the forecast is like pouring down rain, maybe don't wear your vintage watch, wear
Yeah,
a new watch.
a little bit of
And
mindfulness goes an awful
yes,
long way.
yeah,
Um,
sure,
yeah.
sure.
So how I've known you for a while, and I guess I've never really like asked the question like, how did you decide, or when did you decide that you wanted to start making and designing watches? From my point of view, like, what does that process even look like? Like, you wake up one day, and what's the first step? Finding a watchmaker, finding a designer, or how do you go from zero to hero on something like that?
Well, it was organic, right? And it started probably in the same way. I'm probably as just like all your listeners, right? So I got really into watches, and I started buying them, collecting them, trying to learn as much as I could. I took it a little bit further, and I started buying watchmaking tools and taking things apart in my basement
Hmm.
just for fun, just because I wanted to not only experience just the beauty of the things and the different stories behind them, but I wanted to like play with movements. I didn't really even know what I was doing. I was just like, I want to like play with it,
Yeah.
open it up, see what makes it work. And you know I got semi adept at taking movement out of a case, taking hands off, dials off, putting it back together, and I had a lot of fun doing that. It was challenging, and I'm not a trained watchmaker. I just like am pretty good at figuring out how things work. I was just playing with it, watching videos, reading books, getting so far in a build and then realizing, oh, I need this weird esoteric watchmaking tool. I got to order that and wait for it to come in. But I had a lot of fun with that, and I bought, like, you can buy just on eBay like cases and things
Yeah.
and pre-made hands and ETA 6497s and things and hands made for those to post. And I kind of like made a watch, just like kind of a generic watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, this was kind of a lot of fun. I bet other guys in the watch community would like to do this or try it, but then maybe also, through my doing that, I encountered all kinds of pitfalls, right? Like I just mentioned, I'd get so far and realize I didn't have the right tool, or I didn't know how to do a certain thing exactly. I was just kind of trying until I figured it out. So I thought, well, it'd be great if people just had all the right tools they'd need to case up their own watch and kind of have that experience and then have their watch. So really, Cincinnati Watch Company started as build your own watch,
Oh, I didn't know
and
that.
that was
Yeah.
in 2016, and that went on for a few years. And basically, we're just selling kits and parts. We
Mm-hmm.
had like you'd pick your dial, you'd pick your hands, we'd have a case, you'd pick your strap, and then we had videos and we had a toolkit created from a watch supply company so that you could buy a toolkit and you'd have everything you need and you could just do it your home at home and follow my semi rudimentary instructions, but they were good enough that you could get a watch together. I mean,
Yeah.
it amazes me to this day that we sold those and just people who didn't know anything from Adam were just getting them and putting their watches together and then sharing pictures of it. And they were just very inexpensive. We used Miyota, you know, 8200 series automatic movements.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing too expensive or crazy, which made sense because if it's the first time you're messing with a watch, do you really want to be messing with a $500 movement? You
Exactly.
know, so um, so that went along pretty well. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of effort in that because I was like taking little watch parts, put them in like individual dishes and packaging all this stuff up together and shipping it off to the
Sure.
customer. And then during that whole time, me and my business partner Mark, and Mark kind of handles the web and digital side of the business. We were talking about the Union Terminal all along and how much we love the building,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Uh,
clock
for
on the front of it.
for those of our listeners that aren't familiar with Cincinnati, Union Terminal is the big, huge, historic train station right on the west side of
Yeah,
town.
it has a lot of significance. The Union Terminal was built in 1933, very Art Deco. It's considered like an Art Deco train station kind of masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the largest half dome structure in the Western Hemisphere. Um,
Didn't know that either.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very big, um, big dome building. Originally, like I said, was a train station, but sometime around the 70s, when kind of rail died, they kind of converted it for more like to accommodate freight trains, and then it sat kind of idle and unoccupied. It even there was an attempt to make it into like a shopping mall for a few years, even
Hmm.
that failed. But then ultimately, the Cincinnati Museum Center moved into it, so now it's our Natural History Museum, and Cincinnati History Museum. And it's got an OmniMax, and it's a really cool sprawling place. I mean, the kids love the museum part, but for me, just the architecture part, like I'm happy just to like walk in the front rotunda and then just like walk back out, and that's my visit to the museum.
Yeah.
I just want to see the beauty of all the mosaics and just this big dome structure that you're in, and then even more historically significant is, or not even more, but a part of the history is that this is Superman's home. Hanna-Barbera used the design of this building to create the Hall of Justice.
Oh yeah.
It was based on the museum, so it has like pop culture reference. It played important parts in the war, had very interesting clock arrangement in that building. But at any rate, we've talked a long way to say that the clock on the front of the building is very unique, and
Mm.
everybody in Cincinnati would can recognize that clock. So Mark and I had been talking about, wouldn't it be wonderful to make that into a watch? And we weren't sure if anybody even had. Gruen was just down the road in operation in Cincinnati while this was an active train station, and that clock
Yeah.
stood proudly there since 1933.
Yeah. They were
Um,
until the 70s. Yeah. Gruen.
yeah, well, they left Cincinnati in '58.
Mm-hmm.
So, but from 1933, when Union Terminal was built, to 1958, they were a stone's throw away. You know, but I later found out that no one has ever made a watch out of that clock, but me. After talking with the people at the museum. So this whole time, Mark and I were thinking, well, what if we just, in addition to this build your own watch thing, why don't we start a normal brand where you buy a completed watch, and the first watch could be based on the Union Terminal clock? And we thought that would really resonate with the city. And at the time, this was 2018, the museum was going on under like a historic kind of restoration.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things were being repaired in the building. The building was shut down for a year during this restoration, so the city kind of lost its museum for a while. Lots of anticipation for its reopening. Um, so it was very timely, right? That we thought of this idea, and then I like emailed the museum center 100 times. They must have thought I was crazy. Like, who's this guy that keeps like emailing us about this watch, and who's this nutcase? And ultimately, we met with the museum president. I got into the office, Elizabeth Pierce office, with some design drawings in hand, and I said, "We want to do this. We kind of want your blessing with it." I mean, it's public property. I don't know. I probably could have done it without the museum's involvement, but I really wanted them to be a part of it and to like it,
Yeah.
and I wanted to make sure that the sale of that watch, some of it went back to them to support their mission because I love the building. I want the building to stay, and I want the museum center to thrive. So um, she loved it, and that was basically history. I mean, when we launched that initial Union Terminal watch, um, they sold out real quick, and then that was the beginning of the Cincinnati Watch Company.
There you go.
Um,
And from
so
there, you've done. I mean, I can even remember just in the time that I've known you, some very cool models. The aviation watch is the one that comes to mind as one of my.
P-40.
That was one of the ones. One of the first ones you put a automatic movement into. Is that right?
Well, no, that one had a manual wind originally.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, it had a manual wind, a Salida movement, an SW210. Our first auto would have been, well, we had a field watch where we were using back then. Early on, we were using Seiko movements. We don't use those anymore. We're pretty much strictly Swiss now with all our watches. Um, but that would have been our first auto.
Oh,
But
okay.
the P-40 was our next watch from the Union Terminal. And really, what we started thinking about at that time was like, well, this partnership with the museum worked great. It meant something to the community. Um, let's team up with other things that are interesting in Cincinnati and kind of honor them with watches. So for that first pilot watch, the P-40, there's a museum called the Warbird Museum in Batavia, Ohio, and they restore World War II aircraft. Not just for display. Every one of the planes in their museum flies, which is
Hmm.
amazing. And they have a P-40 there that won Oshkosh in 2016 for the best P-40 restoration in the world.
Wow.
So you have a plane in Cincinnati that's probably one of five that was done to the level of detail. And when I say level of detail, these guys, Curtis Wright, who manufactured the plane, specified reed and print screws, which is kind of like a Phillips, but it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So the museum in its restoration had reed and print screws custom fabricated, so the plane was exact to Curtis Wright's specifications. All the wiring in the plane, exact to specifications. New old stock prop, new old stock gun camera that actually works. They said it took them like 5 years to find a new old stock gun camera for a P-40, and they actually flew it up and turned on the gun camera and has videos of it and everything. So these guys are doing like just incredible work, and it's a neat museum to visit because unlike other like Air Force museums or museums with planes, you walk in and like they're roped off and you can't get that close and they
Yep.
don't want you anywhere around them. In this museum, you can walk right up to the planes, and they have a bunch of different World War II aircraft. And so that was the idea behind our P-40 watch: support that museum, that organization, and then have a pilot watch. So you'll find that story with that kind of thing with most of the watches that we do. There's some relationship either to an organization in Cincinnati that interests us,
Mm-hmm.
or there are some Gruen influences that have found their way in some of our models as well.
That's a great
Um,
segue there, Rick, because I was about to say I one of the things that I have always respected about you and about what you do at CWC is you always have that connection like to the historic things in Cincinnati. And I know we've talked about this a bit before, but I also think it's really special that you have brought watchmaking back to Cincinnati, because there obviously is no more Gruen. The brand they moved to South Carolina, right? In for a while or somewhere like
they
that.
moved all over the place. They left Cincinnati in '58, and that's where my knowledge starts to get a little foggy,
Yeah, they just kind
fuzzy.
of faded away
Well,
into
I
obscurity.
think some New York group bought them, but then they were run out of Switzerland. I think their former headquarters in Biel, Switzerland, is now Rolex's headquarters.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure about that. But
But
they changed hands a bunch
yep.
after '58. For a while, they were fully Swiss made. Um, so I have an example of a Swiss made Gruen that I really love. It's probably one of my main vintage watches
Hmm.
that is never leaving my collection. But um, yeah, they moved around. But so the history's kind of. I mean, they ended up even as like a tchotchke sort of brand.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
they've
there was
always been based in Ohio. I think Cleveland at first in the very, very early days, and then when they consolidated,
there's the
moved down to
Columbus Watch Company. Dietrich
Columbus.
Gruen
Yeah.
started in Columbus and started the Columbus Watch Company, made a pocket watch, but then ultimately moved down to Cincinnati downtown and started Gruen and Sons. And then later, as they grew and expanded, they purchased, and built Time Hill, which is in Walnut Hills in Cincinnati, which is a sprawling, looks like a Swiss chalet, massive building. And we were fortunate enough to visit that building. It's now owned and operated by the Lighthouse Youth Services, which is like helps local kids in need. So a pretty worthwhile organization. So we did make a watch that benefited that organization.
Hmm.
We called it the Guild. There was a guild of watchmakers that operated out of the Gruen facility. Though that term guild, I imagine that was more of a marketing ploy. Yeah, there was a bunch
Yeah.
of watchmakers in a room. I don't know how much of a guild they were, other than that they worked at Gruen in that building. Um, so we got to see a tour of it, and while that building even passed hands quite a bit, there was still a bunch of things that they showed us, like safes and stuff that were marked Gruen, and all. There were still things left in the building that date back to the Gruen days, after
Yeah.
even passing all the ownership. But really amazing to see that, and just the scale of it. It really impressed upon me how big of a watch company that was to need that much space
Yeah, they were
to
one of the
to
largest in the world
manufacture
at the time.
watches.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's got to feel
So
really nice in a way to bring like Cincinnati watchmaking back home. And your watches are all assembled in Cincinnati, right? I mean, the parts come from very places, but the assembly is done.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we in many ways we're operating like Gruen did.
Yeah.
Gruen imported their parts, and they were cased up in Cincinnati and sold. Now they did make one movement in Cincinnati for a very brief period of time, and it was actually marked "Made in Cincinnati." I always forget this stuff. What's the movement? The caliber, it was like 332 or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the 335.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, Mark, my business partner, has one with the Cincinnati USA marked on the back, which is
Mm-hmm.
really neat. They actually made those in the old playing card factory, so they didn't have enough space to manufacture them in Time Hill, so they rented out space in what became the playing card factory
Yeah.
in Norwood. Um, so really neat stuff that was there, and you give me a little too much credit bringing back watchmaking to Cincinnati. There's fantastic watchmakers here. There always has been. There's wonderful ads here. Richter and Phillips has been been
Yep.
been around longer than Rolex. So I don't want to take all that credit. We are fortunate for being such a small brand to have a watchmaker like we have. And he came on board in 2020, and that's when every single one of our watches are assembled and regulated
Mm-hmm.
here in Cincinnati under Jordan's direction.
For sure. I
So,
think it is a really cool thing though with what you guys do. That Gruen.
mm,
I talk all the time here in the shop because we have a large part of our inventory is brands like Elgin,
mm,
Gruen, Belova. These American powerhouses that have since really been lost to time, or in Belova's case acquired by different groups.
mm,
But the quality of the watches, especially in the vintage catalogs, still speak for themselves. I mean, just the other day I was looking at a very old Hamilton 1930s, right? And you pick it up
mm,
and it's this little dress piece, gold, 10 karat gold plate, and you give it a couple winds and goes right up. And I was curious, and I put it on the
Hmm.
time graph, and it's 2 seconds a day. Amplitude's
Yeah.
very strong, and this is without a service. We haven't
Yeah.
serviced this watch. And American watchmaking really was the best in the world for a little while.
It was great, and we used to be the best at making watches until pretty much after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Things kind of fell apart at that time, but it always impresses me today. I buy probably more modern watches in my own collection than I do vintage. Vintage scares me, and that's like a whole different. It's a whole different like expertise, and I think it's probably where a store like yours is fantastic, because I can look at eBay all day for old watches and think, oh, well, I would love to have that. But then it's like, oh, what problem have I just inherited? If I buy this thing,
Sure.
is it really real? Is it going to work? How much am I going to have to pay Jordan to fix it? Is he going to be able to fix it?
Can you
You
find the
know, so
parts? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, can you find the parts to fix it? I'm sure the community appreciates stores like yours where that's kind of already handled. you know
Mm-hmm.
so I've collected more modern than vintage in my collecting career. But yeah, back to US history and watchmaking, we were the best, and it was kind of a shame to see that sort of end you know in the US. And there is no infrastructure here, there is no workforce here. I mean, very sparse. So maybe someday, I doubt my lifetime, we'll see a real big brand come back to the
Sure.
US and produce watches here. But in the meantime, we're doing our very little part. And my very
Yeah.
little part is I'm keeping a watchmaker fed,
Well,
or partially.
I think now we're really kind of in a very like a great time, honestly, to be a micro brand, an independent brand. I mean, you look at the popularity that a lot of these brands are gaining, and in the absence of a larger American-based manufacturer, it's created opportunities for independent brands to really go and establish themselves in the market, and that's what you've done. That's what brands based in Chicago, New York have done, and it's, I think, a very exciting time to be an independent
No,
brand.
it's great to see it. It's great to see the Shinolas and other small, the Weisses, all those guys, and I don't even put ourselves even close to necessarily to that level necessarily, but you know, to see all that happening is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
There really is so much choice right now, more than there ever has been. So it's really cool to see.
It's got to give you like a different appreciation. I imagine having to go through all the steps and the months, if not years, of preparation it takes for a single release. It's got to give you kind of a greater appreciation for what some of the brands that we all know and love have to go through. And obviously, the Omega budget is a little bit different than Cincinnati Watch Co. Right?
Yeah.
But like, what was there something surprising along the path where you were going along and maybe everything was fine, and then you get to a problem, you're like, oh, I had no idea that this would be this hard, or I didn't know that I even needed to get XYZ things. Was there kind of like a big, maybe not a speed bump, but did something surprise you in the process for making a watch?
Well, I mean, we've had business speed bumps. I don't think I need to go into those details. I think what has impressed me the most since we started is that there's support there for us, that people wanted it,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no handbook for me with this. You know, when you're making a design, you're really putting yourself out there, right? I don't know if someone's going to like it. There is no market research that I can do. We come up with our designs, and originally they were all mine, but now that Jordan's part of the company, he takes his hand in those as well and leads even some of them. And um, you're really, when you're a little brand like us, you're really taking some risk, and you have no history to draw from. You're creating your own history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so But Rolex, Omega, they all started small too. I mean, they weren't day one powerhouses. So, and this isn't an industry that you usually just take off day one, you know. So, um, I'm just like grateful that we have the customer base that we've had, that we've stayed in business since 2018 and seem to grow every year. So, um, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah,
You know,
the watch
pretty
community,
cool.
the watch community too will let you know if they don't like something. So in a way,
Sure.
it's kind of immediate feedback on how the releases are
Yeah.
going. So if anything, it
Mhm.
just goes to show that you guys are really putting out great design
Well,
after
and
great
we're
design. Yeah.
we're kind of unique as microbrands go. A lot of microbrands start up and their goal is to sell nationally or internationally, and it's not that that isn't ours necessarily, but we did focus on our own city. So, like, we have a customer base that's probably unusual. The Union Terminal means a lot to people here. So I'd imagine a number of our customers are not watch enthusiasts. They're Cincinnati people that just love what it means to them. So they might not be your traditional watch collector. They're more residents of the city that just appreciate it. So we're local based, but also, of course, we're shipping watches everywhere, and people seem to, they enjoy them too. And not all of our watches are so Cincinnati tied. I mean, like,
Hmm.
case in point, this has nothing to do with Cincinnati whatsoever, in any way, shape, or form. But it's us being fun, and we like to, occasionally do something that's fun and interesting.
Yeah. Do you guys
Um,
want to go more retail eventually? I think Richter and Phillips, the downtown AD, has a couple of your watches. Is that a long term goal for you guys?
well, we have three retailers in Cincinnati. We have Richter and Phillips downtown. We have Gerasi Fine Jewelry on the west side and Kirk and Co on the east side. So in a way, we kind of have gone retail, like, from a local
Mm-hmm.
perspective. We're pretty small. It's not that we're not to the point where we could support like hundreds of retailers or out of state retailers, and I even wonder, because a lot of our models are so tied to Cincinnati, maybe they wouldn't resonate. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
if how a Union Terminal watch presents to people that are from, I don't know, wherever. But I certainly ship them all over the place, so maybe they do. I don't know if they're expats, right? Like Cincinnati expats
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that are buying these Union Terminal based watches, but then our other watches have just had general appeal. Um, I think just the community likes them.
Yeah.
The the watches behind me, which was a very popular watch we called the Captain, loosely based off of the Gruen Pan Am design.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another watch called the Guild, which was the one we were talking about, uh, Time Hill. Uh, the font, the whole watch, and the dial really grew and never made it anything exactly like that. But the font is very similar to their 50th anniversary pocket watch, which was solid gold, and it came out at a time it was like $500. I think it would have been like the cost of a car or a house.
Yeah,
I mean, it
that's
was
crazy.
very expensive at the time. So we've taken Gruen elements, and those kind of appeal to anybody else. And if I'm going to homage any part of a Gruen watch, I think we kind of have the right to do that above anybody else, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. I'd agree.
um, so yeah.
Have you ever made like a? I'm imagining like if I had the capacity to design and produce watches. Have you ever like wanted to make something that you just want to wear? Like you see a hole in the market about a certain case size or a dial, and you say, well, okay, I'll just make it myself.
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, that's fundamentally every watch we've ever made was one that I wanted to make and wear for myself, or collectively we wanted to make and wear for ourselves. The challenges is like, sometimes we try to have that Cincinnati connection in some way, but you can't always directly, right? Like dive watches,
Mm-hmm.
there's no diving here. So like it's hard to relate that back to necessarily Cincinnati, but like for our field watch, we called it the Cincinnatus, which was, um, you know, where Cincinnati got its name.
Hmm.
Um, it was a field watch I wanted to make. We tie it to the city by name, but not visually. You know, it doesn't visually represent anything. So really, what you have is a watch collecting nerd that is making watches that I want for myself. That's what's happening here. There's no secret. It's
Yeah,
like
that's a recipe for success right there.
yeah, I'm just thinking up, and we are as a team now thinking up things that we want to do that we feel would be interesting, and you want to wear, and I wear them all.
Yeah.
In
So
addition to all my other collection of
right,
other
right,
watches.
right, right. Um, so what? I don't know how much you can talk about what the upcoming plans are, but is there anything cool in the works that you can kind of hint at for people to keep an eye out for down the pipeline?
Yeah, I can't reveal too much. Other than I can say is a fan favorites being reimagined and going to be coming back this year,
Oh,
and then something pretty much net new that we've never done before is happening this year as well. So,
exciting.
yeah, I'm pretty excited about later this year.
Cool.
Um, Pay attention to us like late summer. We're
Okay.
gonna have some new things to share,
Nice.
um, and I'm pumped about them.
So you almost segued into it before I took you to a left turn. But you're talking about your Gruen in your collection.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that, but what else are you collecting these days? What are you
Well,
into?
I can show my Gruen since Gruen came up, um, and so this is
That's so nice.
we expect I suspect, or at least Jordan could guess that it was like 71, 72.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen these chronographs before. I see them on eBay quite a bit, but what you'll notice is the crown opposite the pushers. That's dead giveaway. Buren 11 caliber in this thing. And whereas most I've seen this design and it's been a 7734 a Valjoux standard, but this one has a Buren 11 in it,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty amazing for a Gruen chronograph. And really, when you think about it, it was so different back then, right? Like this was a collaboration between Hoyer, Breitling, and who else?
Um,
Hamilton.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hamilton made this like one of the first auto chronos, and they're like, oh yeah, we can just give it to these Gruen guys that are like nearly failed at this point. It's just like that would never
An
happen.
act of
Could you imagine
charity.
Rolex or Longer or somebody coming up with a new movement and we're like, oh, you little brand over here, you can have one and put
Yeah.
it in your watch. Like a couple years after we like just introduced it, because I think the Buren 11 was like 69 or 68. I forget the exact year
Sure.
that came out. But so to have that in this watch is cool. And then what's even also cooler about it, it's one of the first watches that Jordan restored working with us.
Oh yeah.
Like
Okay.
so we do watch repair in addition to manufacturing and selling our own brand watches. And he had got this from a customer that didn't want to pay to have it restored, so we just bought it. He happened to have a new old stock set of this exact dial and handset just in a drawer somewhere. He just
Really.
happened to have it. So that's why this thing looks so clean. I mean, it looks nearly brand new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he said he was going to sell it, and he showed it to me. It's like, no, I'm buying it. You're not selling. We're not putting this on the website for sale. I'm buying
Yeah.
that. But this one I've had for many years now, and yeah, it's not going. But I'm all over the map with collecting. I like I said, I like a lot of different modern brands, and as you collect longer, you start to better understand what you like. It takes a long time. You go through a lot of different watches before you get to the point where you can see something and like, no, I'm keeping that. Like I
Mm-hmm.
know I like that, and that one's staying with you. So I would say my collecting in a certain way sort of has slowed down. I unloaded a lot of stuff. Not that I don't still have a lot of stuff, but like I have a lot of stuff that I intend to keep. Um, and so I'm being a little more thoughtful in what I buy before I pull the trigger. And you know, crazy days have passed. Just kind of like, oh, that looks neat. I should buy that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you just all of a sudden you have like every Seiko that ever was ever made. Um, so I've
Yeah.
kind of slowed down from that perspective. I recently picked up this King Seiko,
Oh, yeah.
the LE. Um, really love it. I mean, this thing to me is what Grand Seiko was 6 years ago. Remember when you should be able to buy a Grand Seiko watch for like 3 grand?
I sure do. Yeah.
A new one,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
3 grand. And this is around that price, but like the finishing is right there with Grand Seiko.
Yeah.
This King Seiko, the finishing, and this is the limited edition. It's not their standard line, but the finishing it's Grand Seiko good. The dial work, the just everything about it, and it's like Madman stuff
Yeah,
here. It's
proper.
so
Yeah,
cool.
like that mid-century. Well, Grand Seiko, they all the techniques and all the artisans, they're all kind of like trickled down. So techniques that are developed with Grand Seiko then work their way down the rest of the Presage line and then down
Mm-hmm.
to whatever. Like a couple of years ago, they came out with the baby snowflake in the Presage line. It's almost the
Yeah.
exact same technique that they used to make the normal SPGA 211, the normal snowflake. The
Mm-hmm.
Grand Seiko is Seiko is always like, I mean, if you're not buying Seiko, in my opinion, you're doing watch collecting wrong. And
Yeah.
Nick, our owner here, always makes fun of me because anytime a Seiko comes in the store, he's like, Michael, it's a Seiko, it's a Seiko, it's a Seiko. I'm like, yeah, yeah, okay, I get it. I'm the Seiko guy. Um, but there's some great stuff to be had. I mean, I just got this 6139 speed timer
Oh, nice.
in
Yeah.
a couple months ago. I just picked up a 6309 from the shop too, so I'm getting a chance now, here at the store I can kind of lay hands on things before, I decide to purchase, or it's easier than eBay for sure. But getting a chance to explore some of Seiko's back catalog in person, and it's, I mean,
Oh,
come on.
I'm sure it's fun. I do have one other. I do have a vintage Seiko. It's the Skyliner,
Oh yeah, I forgot you had this one.
and look how thin that thing
Mm-hmm.
is. That's what also amazes me. Back in the day compared to modern, right?
Yeah.
Like they used to be able to make watches so thin. Why can't we do it anymore today?
And
Right?
small too. I mean, the number of chronographs, like chronographs with day and a date complication, or all like a world time, all these things put into sub 40 millimeter cases, and now watch companies are say, oh, you want a chronograph that's going to be at least 43 millimeters. It's really
Yeah, it's gonna
difficult
be
to.
42 and 14 thick. Whereas,
Yeah, but there's
yeah,
all these brands that have all these complications in a 36 millimeter case with a nice domed crystal on there, and yeah, it's amazing to
yeah,
see
and
what.
then you're just wondering like what happened in modernity. I don't know if it's just it's easier to have CNC machines built like stamp out thicker main plates or something, so like it's just easier to make the movements a little bit thicker, so therefore the watches are thicker. Or if
Yeah,
taste changed like back in the 90s and 2000s when everybody was wearing really big watches, and maybe they just thought, well, you need to make a bigger movement for a bigger watch. So I don't know what the deal is with that, but certainly historically with these older watches, I'm blown away that these are mechanical. And like
oh yeah,
this thing, the glass is probably 4 millimeters tall. I bet you this watch is 5 millimeters thick,
it
um, and
it's
it's manual line.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So
It's sort of, I guess, paradoxical in a way, because I think the whole community has seen in the past, I don't know, 5 years, a peak, a little bit longer than that maybe, is all these brands doing like vintage reissues, right? Because everybody wants that vintage taste, that vintage
mm,
style, but they're still doing a lot of them in larger cases. The first brand that
yeah,
comes to mind, and I love Oris, but the Diver 65 reissues they did, I think the standard, they had a 36, but the 40
yeah,
millimeter was
get
kind
up
of
40.
the one they
Mm,
were offering the most. here at this shop, I saw one of the original ones with the kind of big, like, the big funky numerals on there,
Yeah.
and it's a 33 millimeter watch, and that's the
Hmm.
original watch. And so it is kind of funny that the community's now getting the vintage taste, but served on a much larger plate, contemporary plate.
Sure. Yeah. But there are exceptions, and I would say, as a collector and buyer of modern watches, I'm definitely falling victim to the reissue uh, phenomena. Case in point, a King
Mm-hmm.
Seiko remake. um,
Sure.
but the bigger brands are starting to listen. I bought the Black Bay 54
Yeah.
um, that I absolutely adore, and that's a bigger brand listening and making not only something that looks vintage but is
Proportioned.
appropriately sized too, but
Yeah.
then also modern. Um, so that's I like that I'm starting to see people accept that more. That I would put a 37 millimeter dive watch on my wrist as a man, whereas before maybe that would be considered girly or something. I don't know what the thought process
Right.
around it is.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
like Sean Connery wore a 37 millimeter sub, and he's a much bigger man than me.
Yeah.
And no one at that time would have been like, "Oh, what's that girl's watch you're wearing? Or
Yeah.
what's that little
Exactly.
thing you're wearing?" I mean, it's interesting how that's changed.
Yeah, I mean, Tudor specifically has done such a good job of listening to the enthusiast community and coming out with huge array of stuff. Even brands like, I mean, Doxa just came out with sub 200, which is smaller, 39 millimeter case, I think,
Yeah,
as opposed to the normal 42, which I wear all the time. So
yeah.
I think it's interesting to see brands, like you said, started to take note and starting to have that shift. What's the case dimension on your desk diver?
This is let me think here. So it's 40.1, but it's 40.1 wide, but that's excluding these like crown guards that
Oh
are on
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So it might be, if you're going to add the crown guards, it might be 43, but it's essentially a 40,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's 43 lug to lug. So real
Ooh,
short
yeah,
lug
that's
to
gonna wear
lug.
nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah.
wears really nice. So big wrist, small wrist, anybody can put this thing on.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of vintage watches were proportioned that way too, with the
Mm-hmm.
shorter lug to lugs made them just eminently more wearable than what we get often today are 49 and 50 millimeter lug to lug lengths that for
Yep.
a little wristed guy like me makes me look like a baby when I wear one of those watches. But it's not, I mean, I don't like just write off all of big watches. I mean, I have a Marine Master, so like I don't mind wearing the big chunky thing every now and again, but certainly on a day to day, I lean more towards 36 millimeter to 40 millimeter and shorter lugs to lug, just from a comfort
Yeah,
and
for sure.
day
I
to
th-
day standpoint.
and there's that kind of variety in the Cincinnati in the CWC lineup too. I mean, a lot of the watches you have are like 34, 36 millimeters, right?
Yeah, we've done many 36
Mm-hmm.
millimeters watches. Most have been between 36 and 40. Our pilot was 40.5
Yeah.
millimeters. Um, we haven't done any real big boys. I mean, I own this company, so I guess I'm right making watches that I like to wear. So like our size has followed my sense of aesthetic,
Sure.
right or wrong. Right or wrong. Maybe we should be making 45 millimeter watches. I don't know, but yeah, um, but yeah. I mean, I try to make stuff that I like and would personally wear. So, I don't personally wear huge watches, so I'm not going to make a huge watch.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
Um,
hey Rick, we're coming up now to very close to an hour. We try to keep these under an hour
oh, yeah.
for stuff. So
Time
just
flies.
yeah, it sure does. So in conclusion, I know you already hinted at some of the stuff coming up. Uh, where can the good people find Cincinnati Watch Company? You guys are on Instagram and where else?
Yeah. So at Cincinnati Watch Co. on Instagram, Facebook, Cincinnati Watch Co. You can find us at cincinnatiwatch.com for the website. Yeah, any of those three places would be a good place to interact with us. And we have a newsletter. We don't bomb people with messaging, maybe once a month newsletter. So if you're interested to find out what's going on, that could be a thing you could do. And for sure. But thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, man, it's been a pleasure. We've not really gotten a chance to really kind of sit down and talk about a lot of this stuff today, so it was a real treat. Rick, thanks so much for coming on today. It was great to have you on, and we'll keep an eye out for some of those releases coming out a little later on this year. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Rick Bell. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.